The stagecoach rattled through the mountain pass when the ground itself seemed to roar, sending a cascade of boulders tumbling across the narrow trail like nature had decided no one would pass through her domain that afternoon in late September of 1876. 23-year-old Tabitha Vance pressed herself against the worn leather seat as rocks the size of wagon wheels crashed down mere feet from where the horses reared and screamed, their eyes rolling white with terror. The driver, old Pete Hendricks, yanked hard on the reins and shouted curses that would make a saloon girl blush, bringing the team to a shuddering halt just before they would have collided with the mountain of debris now blocking their path completely. Dust hung thick in the air, making Tabitha cough into her handkerchief as she peered out the small window. They had been traveling from Santa Fe to Socorro, New Mexico, where she was meant to start her new position as a schoolteacher, her first real job after finishing her education back east. The journey was supposed to take 3 days, and they were on the final stretch, so close to her destination that she could practically taste the anticipation. Now, staring at the wall of rock and dirt that separated them from the valley below, that taste turned bitter with worry. "Everyone all right in there?" Pete called down, his weathered face appearing at the window, streaked with dust and sweat. I am fine," Tabitha replied, though her hands trembled as she smoothed down her traveling dress. "Can we go around?" Pete shook his head grimly. "Not unless you fancy a 1,000-foot drop on the other side. This here's the only pass through these mountains for 30 miles in either direction. We are stuck until someone clears this mess, and that could take days, maybe weeks if we have to send word back to Santa Fe for a crew." The other passenger, a portly merchant named Mr. Caldwell, leaned out his window and spat. "Days? We will run out of water before then. These mountains are not forgiving, driver. What do you propose we do?" Before Pete could answer, a figure emerged from the tree line above them, moving with the kind of easy grace that spoke of someone utterly at home in this rugged terrain. Tabitha found herself staring as the man descended the rocky slope, his long, dark hair tied back with a leather cord, his buckskin shirt stretched tight across shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. He carried a rifle in one hand, as casually as most men might carry a walking stick, and every muscle in his arms and chest was clearly defined even from this distance. This was not some dandy from town, but a man carved from the same stone as these mountains. "You folks having trouble?" His voice carried easily across the space between them, deep and measured, with none of the panic that Tabitha felt rising in her own chest. Pete squinted up at the stranger. "Rockslide caught us by surprise. You would not happen to know another way through, would you?" The mountain man approached the stagecoach, and Tabitha got her first clear look at him through the window. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble, and eyes the color of dark amber that seemed to take in everything at once. Those eyes swept over the blocked pass, then the nervous horses, then settled briefly on her face in the window. Something flickered in his expression, though she could not quite name it. "No other way through," he said, his gaze returning to the rockslide. "But these boulders can be moved if a man knows what he is doing. Some will need to be levered, others rolled. It will take time." Mr. Caldwell huffed. "One man cannot possibly clear all that. It would take a dozen workers with proper equipment." The stranger's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign that the dismissal bothered him. "Then I suppose you will be waiting here a long while, because I am the only help you are likely to find. Name is Owen Kincaid. I have a cabin about 2 miles north. Been living in these mountains for 5 years now, and I have moved plenty of rocks in that time." "We would be most grateful for any assistance you could provide, Mr. Kincaid," Tabitha said quickly, before Mr. Caldwell could insult the man further. She opened the stagecoach door and stepped down, her legs unsteady after hours of travel. "I am Miss Tabitha Vance, and this is Mr. Caldwell. We are bound for Socorro." Owen Kincaid's eyes met hers fully then, and she felt something shift in her chest, like a key turning in a lock she had not known existed. He touched the brim of his worn hat in a gesture of respect. "Miss Vance, you might want to step back from the rockslide. Sometimes they settle wrong and send more stones tumbling." He was already moving toward the pile as he spoke, setting his rifle carefully against a tree before approaching the largest boulder. Tabitha watched as he examined it from several angles, his hands running over the stone's surface as though reading something written there. Then he wedged his shoulder against it, his whole body tensing with effort, and she could see every muscle in his back and arms strain against the fabric of his shirt as he pushed. The boulder shifted slightly, dust cascading from its base. "Pete, bring me that iron bar from under your seat," Owen called without turning around. "And if you have rope, I will need that too." For the next hour, Tabitha watched Owen Kincaid work with a single-minded determination that was almost mesmerizing. He used the iron bar as a lever, finding just the right angle to send smaller rocks tumbling down the mountainside away from the trail. The larger boulders he attacked with rope, wrapping them carefully before using his own considerable strength to shift them inch by inch. Sweat darkened his shirt and gleamed on his forearms where he had rolled up his sleeves, revealing corded muscle that flexed with each movement. Mr. Caldwell retreated to the shade to fan himself and complain about the delay, but Tabitha could not look away. There was something compelling about watching someone so completely competent at what they did, moving with purpose and confidence even in the face of such an overwhelming task. Owen never stopped, never showed frustration, just kept working methodically through the pile of debris. "You should rest," she called out when the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. "You have been at this for hours without water." Owen straightened, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. For the first time, she saw him truly look tired, but when his eyes found hers, they held a warmth that made her breath catch. "I appreciate the concern, Miss Vance, but the sooner I clear this, the sooner you can get to Socorro safely." She had filled his canteen from their water supply without asking, and now she approached carefully, mindful of the loose stones beneath her feet. "At least drink something. You will not help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." His fingers brushed hers as he took the canteen, and even through the leather, she felt the calluses that spoke of hard work and harder living. He drank deeply, his throat working, and she found herself staring before quickly averting her eyes. What was wrong with her? She had been raised properly, educated in all the social graces, and yet here she was, unable to stop watching this rough mountain man like some silly schoolgirl with her first crush. "Thank you," Owen said, handing back the canteen. "You're kind to worry about a stranger." "You're helping us," Tabitha replied. "That makes you more than a stranger, I think." Something shifted in his expression again, softer this time. "Where are you from, Miss Vance? You do not sound like you grew up in these territories." "Boston," she admitted. "I studied teaching there and accepted a position at the Socorro School. This is my first time in New Mexico, actually. My first time anywhere west of the Mississippi." Owen nodded slowly, his gaze holding hers. "Big change from city life. These mountains can be harsh on folks who are not used to them. Winters are bitter cold, summers are scorching hot, and you are always one rockslide or flash flood away from trouble. Are you trying to frighten me, Mr. Kincaid?" "No, madame. Just being honest. But I can see you have more steel in you than most city women would. Not many would climb out of a stagecoach to check on the man clearing their path." The compliment, simple as it was, made warmth bloom in her chest. "Well, not many men would spend their entire afternoon moving boulders for strangers. I think that says something about your character, too." He held her gaze a moment longer, and she could have sworn she saw the hint of a smile tugging at his mouth before he turned back to his work. "Better get back to it before we lose the light entirely. Would you do me a favor, Miss Vance?" "Of course. Keep Pete and that other fellow away from the slide. Some of these rocks are barely balanced, and I would hate for someone to get hurt because they wandered too close." Tabitha agreed and returned to the stagecoach, but she positioned herself where she could still watch Owen work. Pete had started a small fire and was preparing coffee, muttering about delays and impatient passengers waiting in Socorro. Mr. Caldwell had fallen asleep in the coach, his snores rattling through the windows. The horses grazed on the sparse grass growing beside the trail, finally calm after their earlier terror. As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Owen managed to clear a narrow passage through the rockslide. It was not wide enough for the stagecoach, not yet, but it represented real progress. He approached the fire, his face lined with exhaustion, and Pete handed him a tin cup of strong coffee without comment. "You have done more than I expected," Pete said gruffly. "Thought we would be stuck here for days." "We are not through yet," Owen replied, sitting down on a fallen log. "But with another few hours of work tomorrow, I should have it wide enough for the coach. You folks might as well settle in for the night. These mountains are not safe to travel after dark, even without a rock slide blocking your way." Tabitha had never slept outdoors before, and the prospect filled her with equal parts anxiety and excitement. Pete produced blankets from the storage box, and she made herself as comfortable as possible, using her traveling bag as a pillow, lying beneath the stagecoach, where she would have some protection from the elements. Mr. Caldwell remained inside the coach, claiming the seats for himself with typical selfishness. Sleep proved elusive. The night sounds of the mountains were alien to her city ears, all rustling and distant calls that could have been anything from birds to bears. She found herself staring up at the stars, so much brighter and more numerous than she had ever seen in Boston, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Cannot sleep?" Owen's voice came softly from somewhere nearby, making her start. She turned her head to find him sitting against a tree about 10 feet away, his rifle across his knees. "The sounds are unfamiliar, and I keep thinking about how much work you still have ahead of you tomorrow." "I have had harder jobs." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "You should not worry about me, Miss Vance. I am used to this kind of labor." "That does not mean I should take it for granted," she replied. "You did not have to help us. You could have directed us to your cabin and let us fend for ourselves." "That would not have been right." His voice carried easily in the darkness. "My father taught me that when someone needs help, you give it. No questions, no hesitation. It is just what decent folks do. Your father sounds like a good man." He was. The past tense was not lost on her. He was a trapper, like his father before him. Taught me everything about surviving in these mountains before he passed 5 years back. My mother followed him not 6 months later. Broken heart, the doctor said, though I think she just did not want to be in this world without him. Tabitha heard the grief beneath his measured words. "I am sorry for your loss. It must have been terribly difficult." It was. But they had 30 years together, and they loved each other every day of it. Not many people can say that. He paused. "What about you, Miss Vance? You left everything familiar to come teach in a rough frontier town. That takes courage." "Or foolishness," she said with a soft laugh. "My father thinks I'm being reckless. He wanted me to marry a banker from a good family and settle down to a respectable life in Boston. But I wanted something more than just being someone's wife, hosting dinner parties and embroidering pillowcases. I wanted to make a difference, to help children learn and grow. When the advertisement for the Socorro position appeared in the newspaper, it felt like fate. Nothing wrong with wanting to forge your own path." There was approval in his voice. "Takes strength to go against what is expected of you." They talked for another hour as the fire burned down to embers, speaking about things both profound and trivial. Owen told her about the mountains, about tracking deer through the snow and fishing the cold streams that ran down from the peaks. She told him about Boston, about the rows of brick houses and the harbor thick with ships, about the libraries and theaters that had been her refuge growing up. With each exchange, she felt the distance between them shrinking, felt something taking root that was both thrilling and terrifying in its intensity. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into sleep with the sound of Owen's steady breathing nearby, feeling safer than she had any right to in the middle of a mountain wilderness. Dawn came cold and bright, painting the peaks in shades of rose and gold. Tabitha woke to find Owen already at work on the rock slide, apparently having never slept at all. She quickly tidied herself as best she could without proper facilities, then helped Pete prepare breakfast over the rekindled fire. Mr. Caldwell emerged from the coach looking rumpled and irritable, complaining about the discomfort and the delay before he had even properly opened his eyes. Tabitha filled a plate with bacon and biscuits and carried it to where Owen was examining a particularly large boulder. "You need to eat," she said firmly. "You have been working since before sunrise." He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face, as though he was not used to anyone caring for his welfare. "Thank you, Miss Vance. That is kind of you." "Tabitha," she corrected. "I think after spending the night in the wilderness together, we can dispense with such formality." A real smile crossed his face then, transforming his features from merely handsome to genuinely striking. "Tabitha. Pretty name. You can call me Owen." He ate quickly, efficiently, like everything else he did, then handed back the plate and returned to his work. Tabitha found herself unable to simply sit idle while he labored, so she began helping where she could, moving smaller stones out of the way and clearing debris from the path he was creating. Mr. Caldwell protested that such work was beneath her station, but she ignored him completely. "You do not have to do this," Owen said when he noticed her working. "This is hard, dirty labor." "So is teaching 20 children their letters," she replied, brushing dust from her skirts. "I'm not as delicate as I might appear, Owen Kincaid. Besides, many hands make light work, as my mother used to say." He studied her for a long moment, something like admiration warming his amber eyes. "All right, then. If you are determined to help, you can steady that end of the lever bar while I push on this side. Just be ready to let go and step back if the rock starts to roll." They worked together for the next several hours, falling into an easy rhythm. Owen would position the lever, and Tabitha would hold it steady while he applied his considerable strength to shift the boulder. She could not help but notice the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the raw power he commanded so effortlessly. There was something deeply attractive about his competence, about the way he seemed utterly in control even in the face of such a daunting task. By mid-afternoon, the passage was finally wide enough for the stagecoach to pass through carefully. Pete inspected Owen's work with a critical eye, then nodded his approval. "Good work, son. Damn good work. This would have taken a full crew days to accomplish." Owen wiped his hands on his buckskin pants, leaving streaks of dust and dirt. "Glad I could help. You should be able to make Socorro before nightfall if you leave now." The words hit Tabitha like cold water. Of course they needed to leave. Of course she needed to get to Socorro and begin her new life. But the thought of climbing into that stagecoach and never seeing Owen Kincaid again felt suddenly unbearable. How had this rough mountain man come to matter so much in such a short time? Pete began hitching up the horses while Mr. Caldwell bustled about gathering his belongings. Tabitha stood frozen, watching Owen prepare to leave, to return to his solitary cabin in the mountains. He picked up his rifle and turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. "Good luck with your teaching, Tabitha. Those children in Socorro are fortunate to have someone like you." She should thank him. She should climb into the stagecoach and continue on to her respectable position and her carefully planned life. Instead, she heard herself say, "Will you come visit Socorro sometime? I would like to repay your kindness properly." Something flickered in his eyes, hope maybe, or longing. "I do not get to town much, usually stay in the mountains where I belong." "You belong wherever you choose to be," she replied, surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. "And I would very much like to see you again, Owen. If you would like to see me, that is." His expression softened. "I would like that more than I can say, Tabitha. But I have to be honest with you. I am not the kind of man who knows how to navigate parlors and dinner parties. I am rough around the edges, set in my ways. A woman like you deserves someone polished and educated, someone who can give you the life you are accustomed to." "What I deserve," Tabitha said quietly, "is someone who spent 2 days moving mountains just so my stagecoach could pass through safely. Someone who talks to me like I have a mind of my own, who does not treat me like a delicate ornament to be displayed on a shelf." "I think you are selling yourself short, Owen Kincaid." Before he could respond, Pete called out, "Miss Vance, we need to get moving if we want to make town before dark." She held Owen's gaze a moment longer, willing him to understand everything she could not quite put into words yet. Then she turned and climbed into the stagecoach, settling onto the worn seat as Mr. Caldwell huffed and puffed beside her. Through the window, she watched Owen step back from the trail, becoming smaller and smaller as the horses pulled them forward through the cleared passage. Just before they rounded the bend that would take him from her sight entirely, she saw him raise one hand in farewell, and she pressed her own palm against the window glass, her heart already aching with loss. Socorro was everything Tabitha had imagined and nothing like she expected. The town sprawled along the Rio Grande, dusty and rough-edged, with false-fronted buildings lining the main street and mountains looming in every direction. The schoolhouse was a simple adobe structure with wooden benches and a slate board, but it was hers, and she threw herself into preparing for the start of term with determined enthusiasm. The boarding house where she took a room was run by a kind widow named Mrs. Patricia Holloway, who mothered Tabitha shamelessly and introduced her to every eligible bachelor in town within the first week. There was the young lawyer, the banker's son, the shopkeeper's nephew visiting from Santa Fe. All perfectly nice men, all utterly forgettable compared to a mountain man with amber eyes who had moved boulders so she could pass through. 3 weeks went by. Tabitha taught her students their letters and numbers, organized the small library donated by various town families, and tried not to think about Owen Kincaid every waking moment. She failed miserably at that last task. He haunted her thoughts like a ghost, appearing in her mind whenever she saw the mountains rising beyond the town, whenever she poured coffee and remembered his tired face in the firelight, whenever someone mentioned the high passes and the dangers that lurked there. She told herself she was being ridiculous. They had spent less than 2 days together. She knew almost nothing about him, except that he was strong and kind, and made her feel more alive than anyone she had ever met. It was not enough to build anything real on. It was just infatuation, just the romance of an unexpected encounter in a dramatic setting. It would fade with time. Except it did not fade. If anything, the ache grew stronger, grew. Then, on a crisp October morning, one of her students came running to the schoolhouse during lunch recess. Miss Vance, there is a mountain man asking for you at the general store." Tabitha's heart lurched so hard she thought it might actually leap from her chest. She forced herself to walk calmly down the main street, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Outside the general store, tied to the hitching post, was a large roan horse loaded with pelts and supplies, and leaning against the porch rail, looking deeply uncomfortable in the midst of town bustle, was Owen Kincaid. He had trimmed his beard and tied his hair back neatly, and he wore what were clearly his best clothes, though they were still rough compared to the town dandies. When he saw her approaching, he straightened, his whole body tense with uncertainty. "Hello, Tabitha." "Owen." His name came out breathless. "You came." "I did." He twisted his hat in his hands, a gesture so at odds with his usual confidence that it made her chest tight. "I hope I am not intruding. I know you are working, and I should have sent word ahead, but I do not exactly have an address where I receive mail, and I could not stop thinking about you, and I figured I would just ride down here and see if maybe you meant what you said about wanting to see me again. But if this is too forward or if you have changed your mind, then—" "Owen." She cut off his nervous rambling with a hand on his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath her palm. "I am very glad you came. I have thought about you every single day since we parted." The tension drained from his shoulders. "You have?" "Every day," she confirmed. "I was beginning to think I had imagined how much our meeting meant to me, that I had built it up into something bigger than it was. But seeing you now, I know I did not imagine anything. I am so glad you are here." Owen glanced around at the people passing by, some of whom were staring at the unusual mountain man with undisguised curiosity. "Is there somewhere we could talk? Somewhere a bit less public?" Tabitha considered. She could not bring him to her room at the boarding house that would start every tongue in town wagging. The schoolhouse would be filled with students in another half hour. Then inspiration struck. "There is a spot by the river, just outside of town. It is quite pretty and we would have privacy there. Could you meet me after school? Say, around 4 o'clock? "I will be there." He described the spot he meant, and she confirmed it was the same place. Then he swung up onto his horse with easy grace, tipping his hat to her. 4 o'clock, Tabitha. I'm looking forward to it." She watched him ride out of town, her heart singing in a way it never had before. Around her, she could feel the weight of curious stares and whispered speculation, but she found she did not care even a little bit. Owen Kincaid had come to see her. He had ridden down from his mountains because he could not stop thinking about her, just as she could not stop thinking about him. Whatever this was between them, it was real, and it was worth exploring no matter what the gossips might say. The afternoon lessons dragged interminably. Tabitha heard herself teaching by rote, her mind already racing ahead to the meeting by the river. When the final student filed out at 3:30, she quickly gathered her things and hurried back to the boarding house to change from her severe teaching dress into something softer and prettier. Mrs. Holloway raised her eyebrows at the hasty transformation, but said nothing, though her knowing smile spoke volumes. Tabitha reached the river bank at precisely 4 o'clock to find Owen already waiting, his horse grazing nearby. He had spread a blanket on the grass beneath a cottonwood tree, and he stood as she approached, his eyes tracking her every movement. "You look beautiful," he said simply. You always do, but especially now." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself, though I will admit I rather liked you covered in dust and moving mountains." He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that made her smile in response. "That was not my most presentable moment, I will grant you, but I am glad you did not run screaming from the wild mountain man." They settled on the blanket, and for a moment there was awkwardness between them as they tried to figure out how to navigate this new situation. Meeting by chance on a mountain pass was one thing. Deliberately choosing to spend time together was quite another, with all the implications that carried. "Tell me about teaching," Owen said finally. "How are you finding Socorro?" Tabitha launched into descriptions of her students, of the challenges and rewards of her work, of the town and its inhabitants. Owen listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly paying attention. Then she turned the conversation to him, asking about his cabin and his life in the mountains. "It is solitary," he admitted. "Some days I do not see another soul. I hunt and trap, trade my pelts in town maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and otherwise I keep to myself. It is the life I have always known, the life my father taught me. But lately," she prompted when he trailed off. His amber eyes met hers directly. "Lately it has felt lonelier than it used to. I used to be content with just my own company in the wilderness. But after meeting you, after talking with you, the silence in my cabin feels heavier somehow. I find myself wishing I had someone to share it with, someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to wake up beside in the morning." Tabitha's breath caught. "Owen, I know it is too soon to be saying such things," he continued. "We barely know each other. But I have never felt this way about anyone, Tabitha. From the moment you handed me that canteen and looked at me like I was something more than just a rough mountain man, something shifted in me. I cannot stop thinking about you. I do not want to stop thinking about you." "Then do not," she whispered, "because I feel the same way. It is terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected, but I cannot deny it. I came west looking for purpose and independence, and instead I found you. And I think maybe you are the most important thing I have discovered." Owen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. His thumb brushed her cheek with surprising gentleness. "I do not know how to court a lady properly. I do not know how to write pretty poetry or dance at fancy balls. But I can promise you this, Tabitha. If you give me a chance, I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I will protect you and provide for you and listen to you. I will never take you for granted or treat you as anything less than my equal." "That is all I have ever wanted," she said. "Not poetry or balls, but someone who sees me as a partner, as a person with my own thoughts and dreams. You already give me that, Owen. You have, from the beginning." He leaned in slowly, and she met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was both tender and hungry, full of all the longing that had built up over the past weeks. His arms came around her, solid and strong, and she melted into his embrace, feeling safer and more desired than she ever had in her life. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly, Tabitha. I want to come to town regularly, spend time with you, let you get to know me and let me get to know you. And if, after all that, you still feel this way, then I want to marry you." "I will still feel this way," she said with absolute certainty. "But I appreciate you wanting to do this right. And yes, Owen Kincaid, I would be honored to be courted by you." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, talking and kissing and making plans. Owen would ride to Socorro every week, spending a day or two in town before returning to his cabin. Tabitha would continue teaching, building her life in Socorro while they explored this connection between them. It would not be easy balancing his need for wilderness solitude with her responsibilities in town, but they were both willing to try because the alternative, never seeing where this could lead, was unthinkable. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Owen walked Tabitha back to the boarding house. At the gate, he kissed her once more, sweetly and carefully, mindful of any eyes that might be watching. "I will be back next Saturday," he promised, "and every Saturday after that for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," Tabitha replied, "because I do not think I will ever tire of having you, Owen." He rode out of town with darkness falling, and she stood watching until he disappeared into the shadows, her heart full to bursting with joy and anticipation for what lay ahead. The weeks that followed established a pattern that became the rhythm of Tabitha's new life. She taught Monday through Friday, pouring her energy and enthusiasm into educating her students. Saturdays belonged to Owen. He would arrive in town around mid-morning, and they would spend the day together, walking by the river, having picnic lunches in the countryside beyond Socorro, or simply sitting in the parlor of the boarding house, talking while Mrs. Holloway pretended not to eavesdrop. Sundays, Owen would attend church with her before heading back to his mountains, always promising to return the following week. The courtship was unconventional by any measure, but it worked for them. Tabitha learned about Owen's life in intimate detail through his stories. How he tracked animals by reading signs most people would never notice, how he weathered blizzards in his small cabin, how he found peace in the vast silence of the high country. In turn, she shared her own history, growing up as an only child in a wealthy Boston family, feeling suffocated by expectations and propriety, finding freedom in books and learning, and finally gathering the courage to strike out on her own. The more time they spent together, the deeper Tabitha fell. Owen was not like anyone she had ever known. He possessed a quiet strength that never needed to prove itself, a confidence born from genuine competence rather than bluster. He listened when she talked about her students and her aspirations as though her words were precious, and when he held her in his arms, she felt cherished in a way that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with respect. Not everyone in Socorro approved of the courtship, of course. Some of the town matrons whispered that Tabitha was throwing herself away on a rough mountain man when she could have married someone respectable. Mr. Caldwell, the merchant from the Stagecoach, made a point of telling anyone who would listen that Owen Kincaid was barely civilized and certainly not suitable for a refined Eastern lady. But Tabitha paid them no mind. She knew her own heart, and her heart belonged entirely to Owen. In late November, Owen arrived in town on a Friday evening instead of his usual Saturday morning, his face grim with concern. Tabitha was just leaving the schoolhouse when he found her, and the worry in his expression immediately set her on edge. "What is wrong?" she asked, reaching for his hand. "Heavy storms moving in from the north," he said. "Going to be a bad one, maybe the worst of the season. I wanted to make sure you were safe in town before it hits." "You rode all the way down here just to check on me?" "Of course I did." He said it as though there could be no other possibility. "Tabitha, you matter more to me than anything. I needed to know you were not caught out in this weather." The snow started falling that night, thick and heavy, blanketing Socorro in white. By morning, drifts were piling up against buildings, and the wind howled through the streets like something alive and angry. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping everyone indoors. Owen took a room at the boarding house, and Mrs. Holloway relaxed her strict propriety rules enough to allow him and Tabitha to sit together in the parlor for long hours, talking quietly while the world outside disappeared into whirling white. "This is nothing compared to what it is like up in the mountains," Owen told her as they sat together on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders. "Up there, storms like this can bury your cabin to the windows. You have to dig tunnels just to get to your wood pile. The cold is so intense it can kill you in minutes if you are not careful." Tabitha shivered and nestled closer to his warmth. "It sounds terrifying." "It can be, but there is beauty in it too. The silence after a storm, when everything is covered in fresh snow and the whole world seems to be holding its breath. The way the sun makes the ice crystals sparkle like diamonds. The northern lights dancing across the sky on the clearest nights." He paused, then added quietly, "I would like to show you all of that someday, Tabitha, if you wanted to see it." She turned to look up at him. "Are you asking me to visit your cabin?" "Eventually, yes. Not now, not in the middle of winter. But come spring, when the trails are clear and the weather is fair, I would very much like to bring you to my home. I want you to see where I come from, to understand that part of me. And I want to know if you could ever imagine yourself living there, at least part of the time." Her heart stuttered. They had not yet talked seriously about marriage, though it had been implied in 100 different ways. Now, Owen was taking a concrete step toward that future, asking her to envision a life that would be radically different from anything she had known. "I think I would like that very much," she said carefully. "Though I will admit I know nothing about surviving in the wilderness. I would probably be a terrible burden to you." Owen's laugh rumbled through his chest. "You could never be a burden, Tabitha, and I would teach you everything you need to know. Just like you taught those children their letters, I would teach you how to read the forest, how to keep warm in winter, how to find your way even when the trails disappear. We would figure it out together." "Together," she repeated, liking the sound of that word on her tongue. "Yes, I think together we could figure out anything." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and she responded with all the passion that had been building in her over the months of their courtship. Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat loudly from the doorway, reminding them of propriety, but her eyes were twinkling when Tabitha glanced over. When the storm finally cleared on the fourth day, the world was transformed. Socorro looked like something from a fairy tale, all pristine white and sparkling clean. Children tumbled into the streets to play in the snow while their parents dug out doorways and pathways. Tabitha's school remained closed for another day while the building was cleared and warmed, giving her unexpected free time with Owen. They walked through the snowy streets bundled in coats and scarves, their breath misting in the cold air. Owen's hand was warm around hers even through their gloves, and she felt ridiculously happy despite the biting cold. "I should head back to my cabin tomorrow," Owen said as they walked. "I need to check on things, make sure the roof did not collapse under the snow load, restock my firewood, but I will come back next Saturday as usual." "I will miss you," Tabitha said simply. It was the truth, though she tried not to burden him with just how much she missed him every time he left. Owen stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his amber eyes serious. "Come with me." "What?" "Come with me. Now, tomorrow, whenever you are ready. Not forever, just for a visit. A few days, maybe a week. I want to show you my world, Tabitha. I want to wake up with you in my cabin and teach you to snowshoe and watch you discover all the things I love about the mountains. And I think maybe you need to see it before you can really decide if this life, if I, am what you want long term." Why, Tabitha's mind raced. It was improper, certainly. Unmarried women did not go stay in isolated cabins with men, no matter how much they cared for each other. The scandal would be enormous. Mrs. Holloway would be shocked. The school board might even dismiss her from her position. But when she looked into Owen's eyes, when she felt the solid warmth of his presence beside her, none of those concerns seemed to matter very much. She was tired of living by other people's rules, tired of denying herself what she wanted out of fear of judgment. She had come west to forge her own path, and this, she suddenly understood, was part of that path. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will come with you." Owen's face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He swept her into his arms right there in the middle of the snowy street and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. "You mean it? You will really come?" "I mean it, though we should probably not advertise where I am going. I will tell Mrs. Holloway I am visiting a friend in a neighboring town for a few days. That should cover any questions about my absence." "Are you sure about this, Tabitha? I do not want you to risk your reputation or your position for me." She reached up and cupped his face in her gloved hands. "Owen Kincaid, you moved mountains so I could pass through. The least I can do is risk a little scandal to spend time with you. Besides, I am my own woman making my own choices. If people cannot accept that, it is their problem, not mine." They left Socorro 2 days later, with Tabitha riding a gentle mare that Owen had borrowed from a rancher he knew, and Tabitha carrying supplies in saddlebags. Mrs. Holloway had not been fooled for a moment by the story about visiting friends, but she had surprised Tabitha by pulling her aside and saying, "That man loves you something fierce, dear. I have seen it in his eyes every time he looks at you, and you love him just as much. Be careful, be safe, and come back happy. That is all that matters." The ride up into the mountains was long and challenging, the trail steep and narrow in places, but Owen guided them carefully, his confidence in the terrain absolute. As they climbed higher, the landscape transformed into something almost otherworldly. Snow-covered pines stretched endlessly in all directions, their branches heavy with white. The air was thin and crisp, so clean it almost hurt to breathe, and the silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their horses' hooves in the snow and the occasional call of a bird. "It is beautiful," Tabitha breathed as they paused at a ridge to let the horses rest. The view stretched for miles, peaks upon peaks disappearing into the distance. "I have never seen anything like this." "This is why I stay," Owen said quietly. "This beauty, this peace. Civilization has its benefits, but it also has its noise and its complications. Up here things are simpler, harder, but simpler." They reached Owen's cabin in late afternoon. It was larger than Tabitha had imagined, built solidly from logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Inside, it was surprisingly comfortable, with a large fireplace that dominated one wall, a sturdy bed covered in furs, a table and chairs, shelves full of supplies, and even a small collection of books. Everything was neat and well-maintained, speaking to Owen's competence and care. "It is wonderful," Tabitha said, turning in a circle to take it all in. "You built this yourself?" "With my father's help years ago. We expanded it a few times as we figured out what we needed. The loft up there," he pointed to a ladder leading to a raised platform, "is where I sleep in summer when the cabin gets warm. The bed down here is better in winter, closer to the fire." They fell into an easy domestic rhythm over the days that followed. Owen taught Tabitha how to snowshoe, strapping the unusual contraptions to her boots and showing her how to walk without tripping over her own feet. She fell repeatedly at first, laughing as she floundered in the drifts, but Owen was always there to pull her up, his strong hands steadying her until she found her balance. He showed her how to identify animal tracks in the snow, how to tell the age of a print by its crispness, how to read the story of what had happened just by paying attention. He taught her to fish through ice, a cold and patience-testing exercise that nonetheless resulted in fresh trout for their dinner. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, talking or reading aloud from Owen's small library. Tabitha discovered he was far more educated than his rough exterior suggested. He had read extensively, everything from Shakespeare to scientific journals, teaching himself through books his father had collected over the years. They debated philosophy and discussed literature, and Tabitha found herself challenged intellectually in ways that made her mind come alive. And at night, they shared the bed platonically, both fully clothed, simply holding each other in the darkness. It was intimate without being improper, a recognition that they wanted to wait for marriage before crossing certain lines. But that did not mean they could not take comfort in each other's presence. Tabitha had never felt so safe, so cherished, as she did falling asleep in Owen's arms with the fire crackling nearby and the wind howling outside. On the fourth morning of her visit, Tabitha woke to find Owen already up and dressed, standing at the window with an expression of deep contentment on his face. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, wrapping a fur around her shoulders against the morning chill. He turned to her, and the love in his eyes was so clear it made her chest ache. "I'm thinking that this is the happiest I have ever been. Having you here in my home, sharing my life. It feels right, Tabitha. It feels like this is how things are supposed to be." She crossed to him and slipped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his broad chest. "It feels right to me, too. I thought I might find it too isolated up here, too difficult. But instead, I find it peaceful. I love Socorro and my students, but I love this too. I love being here with you." Owen's arms came around her, holding her close. "Marry me, Tabitha." She pulled back to look up at him. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "I know we have only been courting a few months, and I know this is not exactly a romantic proposal, and I do not have a ring to offer you yet, but I cannot wait any longer to ask. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want you to be my wife, and I want to be your husband. We can figure out the details where we live and how we balance your teaching with my trapping, but none of that matters as much as the simple fact that I want you by my side for all my days." Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes, Owen, I will marry you. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes, but it also makes me braver than I have ever been. Yes, I will be your wife." He kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy, Tabitha. I swear I will spend every day trying to make you as happy as you make me." "You already do," she whispered. "You already do." They spent one more night at the cabin, making plans and dreaming aloud about their future before returning to Socorro. The ride back down the mountain felt different somehow, weighted with the knowledge of the commitment they had made. They were no longer just courting. They were engaged, promised to each other before God and their own hearts. When they reached Socorro, the sun was setting, painting the adobe buildings in shades of gold. Owen escorted Tabitha back to the boarding house where Mrs. Holloway took one look at their faces and burst into delighted tears. "You are engaged. Oh, my dears, I can see it written all over you both. Come in, come in. You must tell me everything." Over tea and cookies, they shared their news. Mrs. Holloway was overjoyed, immediately launching into plans for the wedding. "It should be in spring, of course, when the weather's fine, and we will hold it in the church with a reception afterward at the hotel. Oh, this is so exciting." But Tabitha and Owen had already discussed their preferences. "Actually, we were thinking something smaller," Tabitha said gently. "Maybe just a few close friends, the minister, and a simple ceremony. We do not need anything elaborate." Mrs. Holloway looked disappointed for only a moment before rallying. "Well, if that is what you both want, then that is what you shall have. The important thing is that you will be married and happy together." The engagement was announced officially the following Sunday at church, and the reaction was mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them, recognizing the obvious love between Tabitha and Owen. Others were scandalized, whispering about how a refined schoolteacher could throw herself away on a mountain man. Tabitha heard the gossip but refused to let it dampen her joy. She had spent too many years caring about other people's opinions, and she was done with that now. The school board called a meeting to discuss her continued employment. Some members argued that an engaged woman, particularly one engaged to someone as unconventional as Owen Kincaid, was not a suitable role model for young children. But the majority voted to keep her on, swayed in part by her obvious dedication to her students and in part by the petition that several parents had circulated supporting her. Winter deepened into the coldest months of the year. Owen continued to visit Socorro every week, though sometimes the weather forced him to stay longer or cut his visits short. They spent their time together planning their wedding and their life afterward. They decided that Tabitha would continue teaching during the school year, living in Socorro and in her little rented room at the boarding house. During the summer months and holidays, she would join Owen at his cabin in the mountains. It was a compromise, but one that felt right to both of them. Eventually, they might need to reconsider as children came along, but for now, it would work. Owen spent his visits helping around Socorro as well, not content to simply court Tabitha. He chopped wood for widows, repaired roofs damaged by snow, and even helped the blacksmith with some particularly heavy work. The town began to see him differently, not as some wild mountain man, but as a hard-working, capable member of the community. It did not change everyone's minds, but it softened some of the harsher judgments. In late February, Owen appeared at the boarding house with a small box in his hands. He found Tabitha grading papers at the parlor table and knelt beside her chair. "I know I already asked and you already said yes," he began, "but I wanted to do this properly." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small stone set into it, not a diamond, but something pale blue and beautiful. "This stone is from the mountains, a piece of turquoise I found years ago and had a jeweler in Santa Fe set. I know it is not a fancy engagement ring like you might have gotten back east, but it comes from the place that made me, and I wanted you to have a piece of that." Tabitha's vision blurred with tears as she held out her hand. "It is perfect, Owen, absolutely perfect. I would not want anything else." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. The blue stone caught the light, glowing softly, and she knew she would treasure it forever, not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented. Owen's love, the mountains that had shaped him, and the life they would build together. Their wedding took place on a warm day in early April, with wildflowers just beginning to bloom in the meadows around Socorro. True to their wishes, it was a small ceremony held in the simple church, attended by Mrs. Holloway, a handful of friends from town, and Pete Hendricks, the stagecoach driver who had been there the day they met. The minister spoke words of commitment and blessing, while Tabitha and Owen stood holding hands, looking only at each other. Tabitha wore a dress of pale blue that Mrs. Holloway had helped her sew, simple but beautiful. Owen had trimmed his beard and hair neatly and wore new clothes that actually fit his broad frame properly. When he saw Tabitha walking down the aisle toward him, his face transformed with such obvious love and awe that several women in the small congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "Do you, Owen Matthew Kincaid, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Owen said firmly, his voice carrying easily through the church. "With all my heart, I do." "And do you, Tabitha Rose Vance, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Tabitha replied, her voice strong and clear despite the happy tears streaming down her face. They exchanged simple gold bands that Owen had commissioned from the town blacksmith, solid and unadorned, but made to last a lifetime. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen cupped Tabitha's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness and passion that someone in the congregation actually applauded. The reception at the hotel was modest but joyful. There was food and music, and several people gave toasts to the happy couple. Pete Hendricks raised his glass and said, "To the mountain man who moved boulders and the lady who moved his heart, may you have many happy years together." Everyone drank to that, and Tabitha felt her happiness was so immense she might actually burst from it. As the sun set, Owen and Tabitha slipped away from the party, riding out of town toward the mountains on Owen's roan horse, Tabitha sitting in front of him with his arms secure around her waist. They had decided to spend their wedding night at the cabin, wanting privacy and peace for the beginning of their married life. The ride through the twilight was magical. Spring had come to the mountains, melting the snow and bringing new life to the landscape. Birds sang in the trees, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and earth and growing things. Tabitha leaned back against Owen's chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady against her spine, and knew she had made exactly the right choice. The cabin was just as she remembered it, but now it felt different. Now it was not just Owen's home, but their home, the place where they would begin their lives together. Owen had clearly prepared for their arrival. Fresh flowers in mason jars sat on the table, and the bed was made up with clean linens and soft furs. He had even swept and tidied, making everything as welcoming as possible. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kincaid," Owen said softly as he helped her down from the horse. "Mrs. Kincaid," Tabitha repeated, testing out the sound of her new name. "I like that. I like it very much." That night, in the privacy of their cabin with firelight flickering on the walls, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies as they had learned each other's hearts. Owen was gentle and patient, making sure Tabitha felt safe and cherished even in her nervousness. And when they finally came together, it felt like the natural culmination of everything they had been building since that day on the mountain pass when a rockslide had brought them into each other's lives. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, speaking in soft voices about everything and nothing. Owen traced patterns on Tabitha's bare shoulder, his touch reverent, as though he still could not quite believe she was his. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am happier than I ever imagined being," Tabitha replied honestly. "This is not the life I thought I would have when I left Boston. It is so much better." Owen kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I will spend every day trying to make sure you never regret choosing me, choosing this life." "I could never regret it," she promised. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Owen Kincaid. Moving those boulders was the greatest favor anyone has ever done me, not because it cleared the path for the stagecoach, but because it brought me to you." They spent a week at the cabin for their honeymoon, a week of long, lazy mornings and passionate nights, of exploring the spring landscape and simply reveling in being together without the need to rush back to town. Owen taught Tabitha more survival skills, showing her how to identify edible plants and how to navigate by the stars. She discovered she was better at mountain living than she had expected, her quick mind and determination serving her well. When they finally returned to Socorro, it was with the understanding that this was their pattern now. Tabitha would teach during the week, living at the boarding house, and Owen would visit when he could. On longer breaks from school, she would join him at the cabin. It was not a conventional marriage, but it was theirs, and it worked. The town gradually accepted their unusual arrangement, Helped by the fact that Tabitha remained an excellent teacher, and Owen continued to help whenever he was in Socorro. By the time summer arrived and school let out for the season, most people had stopped gossiping about the odd couple and simply accepted them as part of the community fabric. That summer, Tabitha spent 2 full months at the cabin with Owen. She learned to fish properly, to shoot a rifle for hunting small game, to preserve meat and vegetables for the winter months. Owen taught her to read the weather signs in the clouds and wind, to track animals through the forest, to move quietly and observe without disturbing the natural world around them. She grew stronger and more confident, her skin tanning from hours spent outdoors, her hands developing calluses from work she had never done before. But it was not all work. They also spent long afternoons lying in mountain meadows, talking about their dreams and fears. They went on overnight camping trips to hidden lakes, where the water was so clear you could see straight to the bottom. They made love under the stars and woke to watch sunrises paint the peaks in gold and rose. Tabitha had never felt so alive, so completely herself, as she did in those summer months with Owen. When fall arrived and it was time to return to Socorro for the new school year, Tabitha was surprised to find she was actually looking forward to it. She had worried that once she tasted the freedom of the mountains, she would resent having to return to town and teaching. Instead, she found she was eager to see her students again, to use her mind in that particular way that teaching demanded. The balance between her 2 lives, her 2 loves, felt right. The pattern repeated through the years. Tabitha taught during the school year and spent summers in the mountains. Owen trapped and hunted in the wilderness and came to Socorro regularly to be with his wife. They grew together, learning and adapting, building a life that was uniquely theirs. In the spring of 1878, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both of them with joy and terror in equal measure. They talked seriously about their living arrangements, wondering if they needed to change things now that a child was coming. But ultimately, they decided to keep their pattern for now, with Tabitha teaching until she was too far along, then staying at the cabin for the birth and the first months of the baby's life. Their son was born in late November during a heavy snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. Owen delivered the baby himself, having helped with enough animal births to know the basics, though Tabitha later admitted she had been terrified throughout the whole ordeal. But when she held their son for the first time, a squalling red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair, all the fear melted away into pure love. They named him Matthew James Kincaid, after Owen's father. Little Matthew was a healthy, hungry baby who seemed to inherit his father's lung capacity if his cries were any indication. Owen was a natural father, completely unafraid of the tiny infant, handling him with confidence and tenderness. Watching him cradle their son against his broad chest, singing soft lullabies in his deep voice, made Tabitha fall in love with him all over again. Tabitha took the rest of the school year off to care for Matthew, staying at the cabin through the winter. It was harder than the previous winters she had spent there, caring for an infant in such primitive conditions, but they managed. Owen was attentive and helpful, changing nappies and walking the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, never complaining about lost sleep or the demands of fatherhood. By spring, they had adjusted to their new normal. Tabitha returned to Socorro with Matthew, and Mrs. Holloway was more than happy to watch the baby during school hours. Owen visited as often as he could, and the pattern shifted slightly to accommodate their growing family. The years flowed by like water. Matthew grew from infant to toddler to young boy, tough and curious and fearless like his father, but with his mother's quick mind and love of learning. He spent summers in the mountains with both his parents, learning to navigate the wilderness almost before he could read. In 1881, a daughter joined the family, whom they named Sarah Elizabeth. She was gentler than Matthew, with a quiet determination and an artist's eye that saw beauty everywhere. Tabitha eventually reduced her teaching to part-time as the children grew, wanting to spend more time with them and with Owen. The town school board agreed, appreciating her dedication even in a reduced capacity. She became known throughout the territory as an excellent educator, and several of her former students went on to college, something rare for children from frontier towns. Owen's reputation grew as well. He became known as someone who could guide hunting parties safely through the mountains, who could find lost travelers, who could be counted on in emergencies. He never stopped trapping entirely, but he supplemented that income with guide work, allowing him to spend more time near Socorro and his family. Their marriage deepened with the years, growing richer and more complex as they faced challenges and celebrated triumphs together. There were hard times, certainly. A bout of illness that nearly took Sarah when she was 4, a terrible drought that lasted 3 years and tested everyone in the territory, the death of Mrs. Holloway, who had become like a mother to Tabitha. But they faced all of it together, their love a constant anchor even when the storms raged. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1886, Owen surprised Tabitha by building an addition onto the cabin. He had worked on it secretly during the winter, expanding their home to include a proper bedroom for the children and a larger common area with more windows to let in light. When he revealed it to her that spring, she cried tears of joy. "You have given me everything," she said, standing in the beautiful new space. "A home, a family, a love I did not even know was possible. How did I get so lucky?" Owen pulled her into his arms, still as strong and solid as the day he had moved those boulders from the mountain pass. "We both got lucky, Tabitha. That rockslide was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it brought me you." As their children grew older, Matthew and Sarah both showed signs of their parents' best qualities. Matthew had Owen's strength and wilderness skills combined with Tabitha's sharp intellect and love of learning. Sarah possessed her mother's compassion and dedication, combined with her father's quiet confidence and connection to nature. Both children were encouraged to pursue their own dreams, whatever those might be. In 1889, when Tabitha was 36 and Owen 40, they welcomed a third child, another son whom they named Thomas. His arrival was unexpected but deeply welcomed, a final gift to complete their family. Thomas was a happy, easy baby who seemed to bring joy wherever he went, and his older siblings doted on him shamelessly. By then, Tabitha had stopped teaching entirely, choosing to focus on her family and her life in the mountains. She did not regret her years of teaching. They had been fulfilling and important. But this season of her life was just as valuable, raising her children and building a life with Owen that was rich in love, if not material wealth. The cabin became a gathering place for family and friends over the years. Pete Hendricks, now retired from driving Stagecoach, would visit occasionally to share stories and play with the children. Various friends from Socorro would make the trek up to the mountains for summer visits, marveling at the life the Kincaids had built. Even some of Tabitha's former students came to visit, bringing their own children and thanking her for the education and encouragement she had given them. Through it all, the love between Tabitha and Owen never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. They still took walks together in the evenings when the children were settled, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still kissed like newlyweds when they thought no one was watching. Their physical passion mellowed somewhat with age and the demands of parenthood, but it never disappeared, and the emotional intimacy between them only deepened. On a warm evening in the summer of 1896, 20 years after they first met, Tabitha and Owen sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over the mountains. Matthew was 21 now, working as a guide and tracker like his father, while also studying geology by correspondence. Sarah, 18, had just been accepted to a teaching college in Santa Fe, following in her mother's footsteps. Thomas, at 7, was asleep inside, worn out from a day of adventure in the woods. "Can you believe it has been 20 years?" Tabitha asked, leaning against Owen's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I watched you moving those boulders, and sometimes it feels like you have been part of my life forever." Owen wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. His hair was now streaked with gray, and lines had appeared around his eyes and mouth, but to Tabitha, he was as handsome as the day they met. "Best 20 years of my life," he said simply, "and I hope we have at least 20 more ahead of us." "At least," Tabitha agreed, "though perhaps with fewer children to worry about. I think 3 is quite enough, do you not agree?" Owen laughed, the sound rich and warm. "3 is perfect. Everything is perfect. You are perfect." She turned her face up to his, and he kissed her sweetly, tenderly, with all the love that had sustained them through 2 decades of marriage. When they pulled apart, Tabitha rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady as always. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "The rockslide?" "All the time," Owen admitted. "I think about how close I came to never meeting you. If those rocks had fallen an hour earlier or later, if I'd been hunting on a different mountain that day, if you had taken a different stagecoach route, so many things could have gone differently, and we might never have found each other." "But we did find each other," Tabitha said. "Against all odds, in the middle of nowhere, we found exactly what we needed. You moved mountains for me, Owen, literally and figuratively. You have moved heaven and earth to make me happy." "And you have given me a reason to want to move mountains," he replied. "You have given me love, family, purpose, everything I did not even know I was missing until you stepped out of that stagecoach and looked at me like I was worth knowing." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had watched over them for 20 years, that would continue to watch over them for however many years they had left. Inside the cabin, they could hear Thomas stirring, probably about to wake and demand a bedtime story. Sarah would be reading by lamplight, and Matthew was staying in town tonight, courting a young woman he had met at church. Life had turned out so differently than either of them had imagined when they were young. Tabitha had thought she would be a spinster schoolteacher, married to her work and her books. Owen had thought he would live and die in these mountains alone, never knowing the warmth of a partner or the joy of children. Instead, they had found each other, built a family, created a life full of love and purpose and meaning. "Thank you," Tabitha whispered. "For what?" "For moving those boulders, for giving me a chance, for loving me so completely, for all of it." Owen kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for seeing past the rough mountain man to the person underneath. Thank you for taking a chance on this life, on me. Thank you for 20 years of happiness and for however many more we have ahead. Thank you for being my wife, my partner, my love." Inside the cabin, Thomas called out, "Mama, Papa, I am hungry." They both laughed, the moment of reflection giving way to the practical demands of parenthood. But as they stood to go inside, Owen caught Tabitha's hand and squeezed it gently. She squeezed back, a silent communication of love and commitment and gratitude that needed no words. The mountains rose around them, ancient and eternal, witnesses to their love story. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of wood smoke and wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, a sound that had once frightened Tabitha but now felt like home. This was her life. This was their life, built on a foundation of boulders moved by strong hands and a willing heart, cemented with love and trust and mutual respect, decorated with laughter and tears and the everyday moments that made up a marriage. It was not the life she had planned when she left Boston all those years ago, but it was better than anything she could have imagined. As they went inside to care for their son, to begin the evening routine of family life, Tabitha looked back once at the darkening mountains and smiled. Somewhere out there was the pass where their story had begun, where rockslide had blocked a stagecoach and a mountain man had appeared like something from a story. She sent a silent thanks to whatever force had arranged that meeting, that perfect collision of circumstances that had brought her Owen. Then she turned and followed her husband inside, closing the door on the night, stepping into the warmth and love and chaos of the life they had built together, one boulder at a time. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Matthew married his sweetheart in 1897, a strong and capable young woman named Clara who took to mountain life as naturally as Tabitha once had. They built their own cabin just 2 miles from Owen and Tabitha's, close enough for family, but far enough for independence. Sarah completed her teaching training and took a position in Socorro, carrying on her mother's legacy of educating frontier children with patience and skill. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, observant boy who seemed to have inherited the best qualities of both his parents and both his siblings. He had Owen's connection to the natural world, Tabitha's love of learning, Matthew's physical courage, and Sarah's artistic sensitivity. At 12 years old, he could track a deer through the forest, as well as his father, but he could also recite poetry from memory and paint watercolors of the mountain landscapes that showed genuine talent. In 1899, Matthew and Clara welcomed Owen and Tabitha's first grandchild, a daughter named Rose. The birth of this new generation filled them with wonder and a sense of continuity. Watching Owen cradle his tiny granddaughter with the same tenderness he had shown their own children, Tabitha felt her heart swell with love and gratitude for the life they had built. "We are grandparents now," she said, marveling at the passage of time. How did that happen? I still feel like the young woman who first came to New Mexico. Owen looked up from Rose's sleeping face and smiled at his wife. You are still that woman, just with more stories to tell. And I am honored to have been part of those stories, Tabitha. Every single one. As the new century dawned in 1900, the Kincaid family gathered at the cabin to celebrate. All three children were there with their respective partners in pursuits: Matthew and Clara with baby Rose, Sarah with her teaching colleagues from Socorro who had become close friends. Thomas, now 13, had invited a few friends from the settlement nearest the cabin. The house was full of laughter and life, exactly as Tabitha had always dreamed. On New Year's Eve, as they all gathered around the fireplace, someone suggested that everyone share their favorite memory from the past year. Stories went around the circle: Rose's first smile, Sarah's promotion to head teacher, Matthew's successful guiding season, Thomas's first solo hunting trip. When it came to Owen, he looked at Tabitha and said simply, "Every morning I woke up next to my wife. That is my favorite memory, and it happens every day." The simple declaration made several people dab at their eyes, including Tabitha herself. After 24 years of marriage, Owen still had the power to make her feel like the most treasured woman in the world. When it was her turn, Tabitha said, "My favorite memory is all of you. This family, this life, this gathering right here. 24 years ago, I watched a mountain man move boulders so a stagecoach could pass through, and I had no idea I was watching my entire future unfold. Every person in this room is here because of that day, because of the choice Owen made to help strangers, because of the love we found in the most unlikely of circumstances. That is my favorite memory. Not from this year, but from every year, the memory of how we all came to be." As the clock struck midnight and the new century officially began, Owen and Tabitha stood together on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead. 24 years of marriage, 3 children, 1 grandchild, and countless memories later, they were still standing side by side, still holding hands, still in love. "What do you think the new century will bring?" Tabitha asked. Owen considered the question seriously. "Change, certainly. The world is moving faster than it used to. Automobiles and electric lights and who knows what else. But some things will stay the same. The mountains will still be here. Our love will still be here. The important things do not change just because the calendar does." "I love you, Owen Kincaid," Tabitha said, not for the first time and certainly not for the last. "Thank you for moving those boulders. Thank you for moving mountains for me every day since." "I love you, Tabitha Kincaid," he replied, pulling her into his arms, "and I would move 1,000 mountains if it meant spending another day with you." They kissed as the new century stretched out before them, full of unknown possibilities and certain challenges. But whatever came, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. Their love had survived rockslides and blizzards, the challenges of raising children and building a life in harsh conditions, the judgment of society and the passage of time. It would survive whatever the 20th century brought as well. Inside the cabin, their family laughed and celebrated, warm and safe and together. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, keeping watch over the little homestead where so much love dwelled. And in the space between earth and sky, between past and future, Owen and Tabitha held each other close, grateful beyond words for the accident of timing and geography that had brought them together so many years ago. The stagecoach had been trapped by fallen rocks, and a mountain man had moved them until she could pass through. But in moving those boulders, Owen had opened a path not just for a stagecoach, but for a love that would last a lifetime, for a family that would span generations, for a story that would be told and retold around firesides for years to come. It was a simple act of kindness that had changed everything. And as they stood together under the vast New Mexico sky, Owen and Tabitha knew that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest miracles, and sometimes the greatest love stories begin with someone willing to move mountains for a stranger who will become so much more. Their story was complete, their love secured, their family thriving, and as the first year of the new century began, they stepped forward into it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, ready for whatever adventures still lay ahead.